Dr. Power, guests have arrived.
Thank you, Bonnicastle. Hi, folks. Come in and have a seat. Well, good to see so many of you here today. This is our sixth session as we head down the slope towards the end, which is nice. So welcome to it. I want to talk a few minutes about the assignments if I can. Assignment number 2, I'm still marking, and I apologize. I hope to have them ready on the day you see this video on Monday. But I'm going as fast as I can. But Remembrance Day being what it was, I was kind of under the weather a bit on Monday. And doctor's appointment tomorrow, and anyway, I've had a series of things as well as getting the next course ready for another set of for another program. In any event, life is busy, but I do expect to crash through them on the weekend and get them out to you on Monday. I want them in your hands to give you some sense of what you need to do for assignment number 3. Assignment number 3, you're ready for it. We quite designed this way that you've had 3 practice cases. Just for your own reading, context cases, a little chance to dialogue with your colleagues, make some notes, practice a few tools, and then towards Friday or whenever you can view it in your own time, I put up on the site my suggested thoughts on what I might consider. No wrong or right answers. You may have picked some other points, and I don't say that my suggestions are the only ones. So, but as long as you're generally hitting within that zone, you're doing okay. But number 3 is deliberately designed for you a chance now on an individual basis to answer the questions I've given you. And as I said, again, I've designed it in this way that in this class we've got a wide spectrum of folks with talent. And some of you are quite skilled, and if you have the time and energy and want to do a consulting report, as long as you address at least those questions somewhere in the report, go ahead and do that. The marks will be the same, but if you have the time and energy and want to do it and leave your feedback on it, by all means do that. But for most of you, it's fine with me. You just jump right in, give me a title page, and I don't need a bibliography because you're just relying on the materials that are in the case. I don't have to do any further research, just what's in the case is all I'm expecting from you. And simply question 1, don't bother retyping out the question. I know what the question is, and just jump right in and give me an answer to question number 1, answer question number 2, and just let it go. There's no real word limit on it, just answer the question, and when you think you've got a fair answer, close it off and move on to the next question. I apologize to you for confusions on due dates, Saturday versus Sunday nights at midnight, but I do want it on Sunday nights at midnight. It was always my intention, but for some reason it says Saturday in the site, and that's my error. But it's Sunday nights at midnight, and the purpose I did that is for those folks that have to work on the weekends and must come in. It gives them an extra day to catch up and still have a little time with their families rather than jam everything on a Saturday. So quite deliberately, I want it on the Sunday. It gives them 2 days there to level the playing field a little bit. So that was the intention behind that. I won't say I was disappointed, but I thought for sure there'd be some more conversation about EMPs. If we believe the Internet of Everything and what it's going to do to us and how important and how pervasive it's going to be in our society, we should be concerned about what happens if some sort of electromagnetic pulse destroys the system. We're so reliant upon it. I mean, what happens to driving our cars and global positioning satellites, all that stuff goes out. Big impact on all of us. Cars won't drive, they're on computers. You'll be walking everywhere. Food security, where are you getting your food from on Vancouver Island after 3 days? A big effect. And as well as it led into the conversation briefly about pandemics, the need for you to have a pandemic plan, strategic plan at your place of work on how you're going to deal with that. But there wasn't much conversation on that. I was hoping there might be, so those that didn't could share with some folks that already have a plan at work on some of what constitutes it. It's an important aspect you as leaders going back to your organization should at least have turned your mind to or be aware of. But I want to do another fun one this week if I can. We had a lot of conversation last week about the environment and our concerns over the Keystone Pipeline, right or wrong, on that issue. And it occurred to me that often we go through life looking this way and looking down, and what we see is what we sort of react to and make it happen. But often, given the 6 domains of warfare, space being one, we don't look up. And 100 miles over your head, as I speak to you right now, going at a minimum of 18,500 miles, 18,500 miles an hour is space junk. So this week I'd like you to look at Google the word space junk and just see what I'm talking about. We've almost got ourselves boxed in with this ring of garbage over our heads, environmental issues. Nobody's talking about it, but to the point that now when NASA and other countries increasingly are trying to get off this planet to go to Mars and other places for colonization that they're talking about, consideration is, will you bang into some of this garbage? Initially, when the Americans and Russians went up, they simply took their plastic bags and threw them out the chute. And of course, they were traveling at 18,000, hit like billiard balls and broke and broke and broke and scattered. And so NASA tracks this stuff down to, I think it's a half-inch size, but there's lots of it out there and very deadly and very dangerous if you get hit by something going that fast. So look at space junk a little this week and the impact of that as an environmentalist. If environmentalist is a concern to yours, what are we going to do about it? It's getting worse. And who's responsible for it? Well, today in the paper, Liberal cabinet is going all in on climate change agenda. Stéphane Dion is going to be the finance minister in charge of this. And I'm concerned because they're slipping in not just to climate change, and now we're referring to global warming again. And from some of our previous talks, there's some debate as to certainly the CO2 levels are rising, and the bulk of the CO2 levels are good gases. Within the other gases, there are bad gases. But certainly your trees and everything living on the earth needs CO2. The Amazon, the lungs of the earth, need CO2 to sustain their way of life. So it's something we should look at, but it's also, I guess I'm going to talk about it a bit as well in a few minutes about the TPP and what's going on with these meetings coming up. There's a G20 meeting coming up in which young Trudeau will play his, I shouldn't call him young Trudeau, he's a mature man. Our Prime Minister Trudeau will play his first international role, rubbing shoulders with the G20, and I suspect many of them's parents and folks that they would know, Mr. Trudeau, would have played with as a young man in Pierre's home when they came to visit, because he truly was an international statesman of some renown and played that part and was highly interested in the Europeans and the Chinese and the Russians, and made some effort to get along and to play well with those folks, and to a lesser extent America and Britain. And I don't know to what extent those biases will be shaped from the father to the son, but we'll watch for those. But anyway, this is his first exposure. I want to see how he goes, how he fits into it all, what sort of conversations will take place between Trudeau and Putin. We often forget that we have many neighbors. The Danes are neighbors of ours, Russians are neighbors of ours, and we need to look at these folks too and see what's going on. We share a common border just equally as long, just about, with the Russians, and so Putin and Mr. Trudeau will sit and talk for a few minutes. I'm curious to see the interaction and whether that's going to warm up or whether that's going to get colder. Certainly with Mr. Harper, we saw a lot of the chill factor of finger pointing and human rights and things of this nature. And I suppose I should digress for a moment too on human rights while I think about it. Do you know where human rights come from, the United Nations human rights? Back at the time of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, at the end of the war, Roosevelt and the few countries left standing, of which Canada was one, and was truly a G7 nation, the fourth largest navy in the world at that point, decided the rules of monopoly, how the world would be playing this new world order in 1944, that after the war, how were we going to react and play with each other. And that was coming out. One of the tasks in there was Roosevelt appointed his wife, Eleanor, to head up the UN Commission and design a set of human rights for this new world order that was going to take place after the World War II. And she picked a Canadian doctor, interestingly enough, and the Canadian doctor did the draft and prepared the human rights that we now refer to, and he based it on Judeo-Christian values and ethics, and they were adopted. And so it's strange today when you see the United Nations having adopted these, and Harper takes his finger and points at world leaders like the Chinese leader and accuses him of human rights at a time when we should remember that the Chinese were the Middle Kingdom. They were the center of the universe, truly. For almost 2,400 years, they were the center of the universe. They had a culture far older than the short one we have in Canada, and with their own values and traditions and mores and folkways, and is a little presumptuous for us to poke our fingers at them and say, these are the right ones and yours are the wrong ones. And the same with the Russians. The same with Asia and Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Population, they're far greater in number, et cetera, et cetera. The cultures are far older. And to what extent do we have to rethink or at least retest this hypothesis that these are the human rights that should be internationally adopted without any regard to these other cultures that didn't have a voice back at the time the Canadian doctor put them together. So we could look at that maybe. Bernie Sanders, steady rise with respect to the states on the Democratic side, but it's important for us to watch on who's going to be the leader down south, because it'll make a dramatic difference on whether it's the progressive socialism on the left-hand side, or the Republican side, the right wing Attila the Hun, if it goes that far as the Tea Party, on the other side. It'll make a difference on the relationship with Canada and how we get along, and on Keystone pipelines and those sort of tests. So it's important for our strategies that we monitor who's going to take it over. Next week will be a little late, but certainly the Hindu Festival of Lights took place, and some little light balloons were being sent up here in Victoria as we, in honor of that and celebrate it. Okay, let's see what else we have. South African grave, a link to Canada's past in 1901. Of course, we had soldiers in the Boer War, which was interesting. We've got Canada's North, we've known in this class now that Canada's North is under attack, and remember the Arctic Circle, but we've got the Danes and the Russians, we've got a lot of European countries leaning towards Iceland, looking at it as well, although we don't actually share a border there because of the space and time. Americans are doing the same sort of thing. Even the Chinese that are not an Arctic Circle country have made a statement that the passages in the north are part of their national security interests, because the advantage of shipping stuff from China is about 50%. To ship these larger than normal tankers that can't fit through the Panama Canal, they can now build them 5 times the size, and it cuts the shipping costs down and the travel time down by about 50%, and they can fly through our north and get to Europe much faster. And so as a manufacturing nation, as we did with the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, this choke point can't be closed off by any nation so far as the Chinese are concerned. And the Russians understand that, but the Russians have taken control. They have 20 icebreakers up there, 16 are nuclear, and they put a military base about 60 miles away from the pole. And so they make a point that any ship coming through their passage, of which there are 3, they actually go out and say, fine, we'll escort you through, we'll charge you a fee. They put an icebreaker in front and take them through. Canada, of course, does not have any icebreakers at all that can go through the old ice. We have icebreakers of vintage proportion that can go through some of the new and young ice, year-old ice, but it can't crash through the hard ice that's been there for a number of years. But interesting enough, again, the Chinese have built the largest icebreaker in the world, and for what reason? And so, in any event, we're talking here about an Arctic island called Hans Island, and it's nothing more than a rock about 101.2 kilometers, less than a mile, a little rock sitting out in the middle of nowhere, that the Danes and the Canadians have been fighting over and taking turns. One will come ashore there and put up a cairn, somebody will come ashore and put a flag up, and it'll be taken down. And so, like children, we're squabbling over this little piece of stone, which by itself doesn't sound like much, except for if you get that, then you get up to this 200-mile limit away from that for all the gases and oils and supplies that are there. And so the question becomes, can we share it? And so there's a proposal here that we actually take that island and make it like a condominium, that both parties own the island, and they agree to a set of condominium rules. They pay for whatever minimum upkeep, but they share in the resources. And so that's being bantered about as a possibility, and it would reduce one of the choke points, I guess, one of the action points that tensions that currently exist between the Danes and the Canadians up there. And so it would be a good thing to resolve it in a friendly way. But it's just one of the small ones. I mean, certainly the Russians with the Lendorf Ridge that runs straight down through, they lay claim to that whole thing. And if they get that, that is of mammoth proportions. And Canada lays claim to it as well, as do the Danes. So we need to watch what's happening up north. We need to spend some money up north, and we're not. We're spending our money on On terrorism, on the 49th parallel, we're spending very little up there. We make lots of announcements of what we're doing up north, but we don't do anything up north. And every hour we wait, it's slipping away to others. Interesting here, the European Union have put a labeling decision out that sparks anger. Up to this point, all the occupied territories of the West Bank, everything after the '67 war that the Israelis took over on the in that area and down and through Gaza, they've got building new farms and factories producing dates. And I was at the Dead Sea. I was there, and I remember that they produce wonderful facial creams. But they label all these products of Israel. And there's many people don't agree with this occupation that's taking place of the Palestinians' properties, homes, and the expansion of the West Bank and what the Israelis are doing. And so as a result of that, the Europeans have passed an act that seems to be in response to that, saying if you don't mind, everything prior to the '67 war you can label as a product of Israel, and we know we're buying Israeli stuff, but when you're talking about these other sites, we're not going to accept those. They're not going to get preferential treatment. You must label them as the product of the West Bank, the product of the Dead Sea. And that way people have an option whether or not they wish to support these ventures on these territories. So it's an interesting thing. We'll hear more about it. And while I was thinking about Israel, it's another thing that is of interest to me. I'd like you to look up the word global warming. Correction, not global warming, global dimming. And I think you'd be shocked by what you read there in next week. Another thing that may affect our strategies and our growth and our agricultural and food supplies is this aspect of global dimming, and it's particularly active in Israel. So have a look at that, global dimming. Isn't this a fun class, the trivia stuff we talk about? Here's about Trudeau Prime takes place in the world stage. And I won't say much more than I've already said, I guess, about the idea of getting ready to go there as part of the G20. Syrian refugees. We've got 25,000, and our Prime Minister has agreed to really give that a serious run of getting those folks into Canada. 25,000 of these refugees are going to come out of the refugee camps, and 25,000 of them to Canada. And of the 25,000 to Canada, 2,800 will be coming into BC. And the question becomes where to put them. And one of the spots they're thinking of is the Beaverfoot Lodge, which they hope to put up to 70 of the 2,800 folks in there. It's 12 miles down a logging road in the ski hill in wintertime, just close to Golden, which is a small community close to the Alberta border, is where they're going to drop these folks. And I can't imagine coming from that climate of the Middle East and the warmth and the different environment and dropping these folks in a ski lodge middle of winter up a dirt road outside of Golden. We could talk a bit about what we're doing with that and what we can do about that and should we be doing about that. Private fund buys a Vancouver subsidized housing plan, and this is all about, again, the growing mass of unemployed and folks that are earning poverty wages and have less than poverty money to live on. We're talking about some sort of a subsidized housing plan in Vancouver. Recall last week we talked about 2.8 or 2.9 billion was the average price. Million was the average price for a home in the in Northwest Van, in West Van, and to supplement that, they're trying to put out homes at this subsidized about 360 units. And so the question becomes, does it make sense to do that? You still drop these folks into an environment that just buying groceries and getting around, is it the right place to do? Or do we have to pick them up and do as we've done with the Syrian folks, migrate them to a community? One of our villages within BC that the cost of living is far more reasonable. In any event, they're trying to do that, and to Victoria's credit, they're trying to do exactly the same thing for the homeless. And so there's a move, the recognition that there's a growing mass of folks that need our help. This week, our dollar close to unchanged. Gold is down to $1,080. Oil is down to 42. We've had conversations which way we think we're going. Canadian oil sands are complaining about Suncor Energy, which Suncor is just a powerhouse. It's doing everything right out there in the oil patch. It's really growing in this. They're exploiting the opportunity of the down economy and getting ready for the turnaround. And one of the things they're doing to about a takeover with Syncrude is they are greasing the wheels with brokers. They're paying premiums to brokers to encourage the brokers to make the sale come about, make it happen. And so do we require in Canada, and to what extent do we have in Canada, a national securities regulator, somebody that can make sure the laws are the same from coast to coast and regulate this sort of action or front running that they do on some brokers' houses on buying stocks for you and I, while their stock zooms ahead using fractions of a second benefit. We could look at that today and the need for global regulators. Bank of Montreal girds for long war on the financial tech frontier. Bank of Montreal are completely shifting their form of transforming right now in their businesses, and they see themselves, because of technology, they're making large investments in technology, Internet of Everything, getting ready for it, and they're abandoning some of their traditional areas and downsizing, getting ready. And so we're going to see a lot more of that happening, but it's interesting the Bank of Montreal is off the mark and getting ready. This week, China's consumer sent the message with Blowout Day. Alibaba Group, that online buying that was just opened up about 4 or 5 years ago, not very long ago, it took them 12 minutes and 28 seconds for them to sell over $2 billion worth of merchandise. That's amazing. In 12 minutes, they did $2 billion worth of merchandise online. It's like their Boxing Day sales in Canada, and just amazing what they're able to do. And observers are looking at that saying, well, maybe the economy in China is not that broke. If they can do that sort of sales, it's the highest ever, that sort of marketing, that sort of sales, it would might indicate that the Chinese aren't in that critical condition financially that we talk about, and we see lots of evidence that would support that notion. But this certainly flies in the face of that it seems to be doing well. It also speaks to us, doesn't it, of the Internet of Everything, the transition from bricks and mortar to online sales. And we'll see the same thing here at Christmas time for us. What will be the condition of the corner stores within the malls? The promised middle-class tax cuts excludes most Canadians, and we can read more about that. Well, that's interesting. Bombardier again is under attack. We talked about Bombardier last week or the week before, and lobbyists and handouts. We didn't get much of a conversation on it, but it appears that Mitsubishi has started a regional jetliner, carries 92 people, and it's just been launched, and they're taking direct aim at Bombardier as the second biggest regional jet supplier. So they're out to eat the cake of Bombardier, and that's not surprising. I mean, we talk in terms of strategy that when your competition is weak and showing signs of weakness, that's when you attack. And if they're large, you do a yapping dog technique, come down, take a rip off, and then go back the hills and get out of the way so you don't poke the bear. But if you're down and out like Bombardier is, then you go after them. It was a good example of that was Coca-Cola and Pepsi coming through the 30s. At that point, 30s and 40s, Pepsi was equal to Coca-Cola and then lost its way, as Bombardier did. And Coke went in and just beat them up terribly and left them for dying on the floor. Pepsi were, for all other purposes, worse than Bombardier. They were gone. And Pepsi, with a strategic plan, new metal models, got back up off the dust. And they decided, let's have a look what we can do to change it. And so they did. At that time, you remember the little green bottles for Coca-Cola were 6-ounce bottles. And the big one was Coca-Cola. They were everywhere. They had distributors, lines, factories, all built for the 6-ounce bottles. And Pepsi came out in the late 40s, early 50s with a 10-ounce bottle, and for the same price. And of course, Coke couldn't restructure, reshape, retool its organization, its manufacturing plants that quickly, and it gave Pepsi a chance to get up off the ground and take the pole position. And so through the 50s and into the 60s, Pepsi led the role. And then Coke finally caught up, and now Coke again is back out in the front. But it's that idea that once you get your enemy down, don't let them get back up. And that's what's happening here. Is Japan have targeted Bombardier, and I don't give Bombardier much longer. Norfolk, CP Norfolk is a American southern railway system, and CP is growing and through mergers and acquisitions want to take it over. And one of the things they're pushing back on, and Norfolk saying it probably won't work, is because there's a certain culture in the southern United States that's not a good fit with the Canadian culture, with the CP culture. And I have to underscore, as we've seen in our mergers and acquisition talk, one of the biggest reasons mergers and acquisitions fail is because of culture. And we talked about Daimler Chrysler and their merger, and actually became an acquisition, but we couldn't do it because the Americans didn't want to hear that the Germans were taking over an American icon. But in any event, the CP is going to take over Norfolk, but watch for the cultural clash, whether that's going to be an impediment to a successful takeover. There's a skill set required. Folks, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is concerning to me. I've not read it all. It's thousands of pages. I'm starting to read more about it. But there are 12 countries going into this, and they're meeting in Europe in December, and they're talking about intellectual property and other issues. And I'm going to digress for a few minutes here if I can. We should understand that this is another whole new transition. In 1944, I talked about the Bretton Woods Agreement, the surviving nations getting together, designing the rules. Out of that comes global institutions like World Bank, IMF, those sort of things are put in place, United Nations, and the organization functions well up to about 1971-73, and at that point when Nixon goes off the gold standard, countries can fix or float their currencies, the rule shifts again. And a few years after that, Margaret Thatcher and Hayek, the economist, bring about globalization, the first steps for globalization, about 1979, when Margaret decides to attack the unions and get to the free market system flowing and going, based on Hayek's economic theory. And about 18 months later, Reagan gets elected to be president of the States in 1980, and he follows the teachings of Friedman, a Chicago economist, who was very similar to and aligned with the thoughts of Hayek. And so those thoughts prevailed, and the globalization takes off. And I want you to think of globalization, if you would, that the world is a bottle of water. The world is a bowl of water, and we saw, as a result of globalization, we see little patches of ice being formed, these regional groupings of NAFTA, the ASEAN group, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the European Union, and clusters of ice start to form on that. And that's what we've seen happening with the rapid growth of these agreements and organizations where we give up some sovereignty, but we work together, and as a result of that, economically, we're better off. And I think what we're seeing happening now is that sheet of ice, all those organizations are now starting to get a little bit locked in together into another next level up structure of a new world order of some description with universal rules and universal laws that will apply to all nations, and we'll give up that sovereignty to be part of this because of the economic benefits. And this is the first step. There are 5 steps towards political union, and there's no question the Europeans have simply made those steps public, and you can follow the transition as they've gone through from the beginning up to today, that they're just banging on the door of political union, becoming one nation. And that's not unusual. Certainly Canada did it with 4 provinces. At the time of 1867, we became one nation. The Americans, it took a little while to gel 13 colonies, but they were able to become one nation. Well, the European Union are going through the same steps and bouncing on that with a common currency. And they're just about, there's level 4, but they're starting to bang on level 5. Interesting enough, Canada, we don't talk about in this country, but with respect to America, we are about step number 2 and banging on step number 3 of this political union. It's starting to happen. Our military, our laws, our reciprocal tax agreements, etc. We're getting closer and closer linked with some of our NAFTA is bringing us closer together. And so watch for that over there. But I urge you as strategists, as people who will be the decision makers in Canada with your MBA and your positions in your business, you're the ones who are going to speak for us. And we need to be on guard watching for this. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's good for the economy. But watch our sovereignty and our culture and what's happening here. And so the first little glimmers, sparks are starting to happen. Saudi fracking boom. The Saudis are now on to doing fracking over there. They've got about 600 trillion cubic feet of shale gas about to come on the market, at least not right away, but they're working at it. It's going to have another seismic shift. It's going to ensure that the price of gas, which is now less than $2 for a million cubic feet of it, it's going to keep it at that price, low gas prices, with this coming on. It's going to threaten the geopolitical affairs of Russia and the Europeans, and particularly the Germans, who are so dependent on gas coming from Russia to keep them warm in the wintertime. It can now come from the Saudis down south and bring the cost down and reduce that stranglehold that Russia has on all of Europe, particularly in the winter months. And so there's great things that move quick here in the Saudis, but the energy story is fascinating. And again, the other side of that I just, it occurs to me that you've got to capitalize the cost of all this new fracking equipment, the pipelines and stuff to get to Europe. What's the amortization period to get your money back? Because I'm a true believer in the next 10, 15 years with the Internet of Everything, that we're going to be into a lot of alternate energies that are environmental friendly, that we don't need to do cap and trade and spend the money on that, but put the money into these alternate energy things, and that will happen for us. And so yes, they've got their fracking boom, they're about to do it, they're going at it full tilt, but it may be short-lived. It may be 10, 15 years out that we don't require it. See, the surviving U.S. power plants will keep the coal demand steady. President Obama has got rid of a lot of the coal and taxed them so severely that the coal-fired energy units, coal plants, power plants are dropping like flies down there due to the moral suasion and taxes. Farmers are aging, old techniques go out, and the story here just we've been talking about is he's 55, getting out, his kids don't want to take over, and if they do, they want the Internet of Things, and so they're looking at technology to make this farm work. And there's a good story on that. I was shocked by this. The youth employment rate in Canada is 55%. These are folks from 15 to 25. Only 55% of them can get jobs they want to get. That means about 45% are underemployed or unemployed. And that's very serious when you get that large cluster of 20-year-olds that don't have any future. We've got to do something about that. It's what we've talked about, this gap between rich and poor. It's quite serious. Holidays are do or die for small operators, and we've talked about that. And every year the malls are under attack and small operators are under attack. And is there a place for small operators in malls? Is there a place for the normal retail stores, the Gap and the ones of this nature in malls? And I'm more and more believing that yes, there's a place for the unique ones that are the specialty shops, the Cuban cigar shop, the special toy shop that has something rather unique. But the stuff that's rather generic, a Lego set's a Lego set, and if I can order a Lego set from Amazon and it's delivered to my front door quickly, and it may even be cheaper, then probably I'm not going to go down and drive and get on the Christmas bustle and tussle to buy a Lego set for my grandkids. So watch for that, but certainly it's a make or break decision. If it doesn't make it, there'll be more small businesses going out, need an exit plan in their strategies. Here we got the European federal, the equivalent of the federal feds, and the American feds getting ready to adopt different positions. The Europeans want to drop their interest rates, the feds want to raise their interest rates, and so there's about to be a bit of a clash here to see what happens. I see BHP has done it again. They got a major spill going on in Brazil. You recall they were in the Gulf a while back. Apple's talking to the U.S. banks about developing a person-to-person mobile payment service. No big surprise, but again, that's part of the bank being under attack by technology, Internet of Things, that the banks may have no choice because of Apple's size, that if you don't do it, then somebody else will, sort of mentality. So the banks will probably have to play along, but it means they're giving up some of their debit card ability to Apple. And Apple is just saying stand and deliver. IBM, talk about strategy. IBM's been around for well over 100 years. And they have lost on every window, much like Polaroid cameras did. They've missed the window as it went by the door. They haven't seen the Internet of Things going by the door, and they're trying quickly to retool and to get into the cloud and have something valuable that is seen as valuable in the eyes of the consumer that will keep them into business. And so they need to reboot. They're moving fast trying to do that. But the message for us in looking at IBM is the need to do what we're doing today, is that scanning the ecosystem out there as to what's coming through that can impact us, or it's things we need to mitigate the damage or exploit the opportunity. And it's, in my mind, IBM, it may almost be a little too late, because I want you to think of this, that your competitor has just been born. It's not the IBMs, it's not the General Motors, it's not those old companies. Your competitor is a brand new startup company that's just been around maybe less than 10 years. It's a new Facebook, the new Google, Twitter. They just keep on coming, and they grow to $1 billion empire pretty quickly. You need to run paranoid. You need to look over your shoulder. Don't rest on the oars like IBM did, or like Cisco Systems is doing, or correction, Intel rather is doing. That their Moore's Law on their chip is the only chip, and they'll solve the problem. I can tell you that they need to run paranoid. The new upstarts will overtake them. U.S. gas, natural gas supplies near its record high. Japan companies, no fast recovery. There's been about 12, 13 years of this right now, I think, of trying to get their engine re-stimulated. So I guess we had a lot of good material in there to talk about. I'm enjoying the class. I hope you are too. Call me anytime. Bye now.